So housing and supports is what we know can address homelessness. In fact, that same formula, that very formula has cut veterans homelessness by more than half in the last 8 years in the United States. I just want to say, housing is a basic human need, and it is kind of a prerequisite among with a few other things for if anyone's going to be able to reach their full potential, they need that stability. And speaking from a health point of view, we see that people who are unhoused, especially unhoused on the street, unsheltered, they die on average about 20 to 30 years earlier than the general population.
The answer is reform in our capitalist system where we can provide for people that are less privileged. Welcome to the Break Free Podcast. I am your host, David Mancella. We dedicate this time to interview people that are making a big impact in the world, making this world a better place, bringing love and hope for everybody, not just themselves, in form of leadership, in form of leading organizations that are actually helping out. It could be a private company, it could be a public company, it could be a non-for-profit. It really doesn't matter. What matters is the impact that these leaders are doing in people's lives. And what a beautiful example today we have with us, Bobby Watts. Bobby, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, David. I'm honored and glad to be here.
Wonderful. Bobby, for the audience, can you tell me your full name, where do you live, and what do you do for a living?
Certainly. Full name, I go by Bobby Watts. Bobby is short for Robert, but Bobby Watts. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am the CEO of the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, which is a national organization that happens to be based here in Nashville.
That's beautiful. See how you really fit what I just said about the podcast is amazing.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the organization. How are you guys helping the homeless?
Sure. So the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council supports the 300 federally qualified health centers that have special funding and a special emphasis on treating people without homes. We know that many of our unhoused neighbors will not go to a hospital, will not go to a regular clinic. They need special care, special services. So these clinics specialize in that. There's at least one in every state, a total of 300 across the country. We also support 150 medical respite programs. And medical respite programs are relatively innovative and new, though they've been around for about 35 years. They've really taken off in the last few years with help from the council. And that is for people without homes who no longer have a clinical reason to stay in a hospital, but without medical respite, they end up being discharged to a shelter that can't take care of their needs, to a friend's couch, or all too often the street. And then they end up with, because they haven't been able to heal, they end up back in the emergency room with more complications, admitted back into the hospital with in poorer health and at much greater cost to the health system. So medical respite breaks that cycle, gives people a safe place to heal, stay connected to services, and it works best when medical respite is a bridge to housing.
That is amazing. And how did this organization get formed? Do you know the history about it?
Oh, yes, I do. It started in 1985. That's where the genesis of this starts, when two large private foundations, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Pew Memorial Trust, said, homelessness is exploding in the public consciousness. We didn't have mass homelessness before, the mid 80s. And they said, we need to do something about this. They were both healthcare, both had healthcare emphases. So they said, let's start a program. So they started a pilot program with 19 programs, one program funded in each city. There could only be one in each city. The mayor of the city had to sign off on the application with the idea that to force everyone in that city to work together. So these 19 programs became very, very successful. They used a lot of different strategies, whatever was appropriate for that city. And then in 1987, with about a year to go before the foundation funding ran out, the federal government said, we need to do something to make sure that the health needs of people experiencing homelessness are met. And they looked at this model and they said, this is great. So they created a funding stream that based upon basically all the principles from the original grant, from the original grantees, and created a funding stream. In 1996, the funding got folded into the much larger community health center movement, and that's where it remains today.
That is beautiful.
That's the healthcare for the homeless program. The council started when these original 19 programs, when the funding was getting ready to run out, they said, we need to find a way to stay together. So my predecessor here, John Logier, who ran the Nashville project, kind of was tapped to help bring everyone together, and then the organization grew up around him. So officially got the incorporation papers in 1991, but the beginning really goes back to that beginning in 1985.
That's beautiful, how like a private fund started this blessing, and it was so effective that it raised the awareness of the federal government, and now it's something that is supported across the nation. What a beautiful thing. I love when I bring people here, and instead of looking at problems, they show the solution that they are bringing to the world, right? Because you go everywhere, and homelessness is, I don't think I have ever seen so many homeless people now. With COVID, it looks like there is 10x more people without housing than before. Even where I live, I live in a suburb of Toronto, about an hour away from Toronto downtown, and we never had homeless people to the level that we have now. We might have one or two guys on the streets. Now there is homeless parks where there is dozens of homeless people living there. And if you look at our country, Canada, most of the year is cold and below zero. And I'm like, my heart breaks. And finding you and what you guys are doing for the people that are less privileged is just beautiful. So I thank you for your work.
Oh, it's an honor and a blessing to be able to do this work. Thank you.
Bobby, personally, in order to run an organization like this with the impact that you're doing, it requires a lifetime of training and a calling. So I would love to get back and see how you got to be where you are. So where were you in the last year in high school? What was your thoughts? What did you want to do with your life?
Sure. So like many, students that are fairly good students, you say, I want to be a doctor or a lawyer. So I was thinking I wanted to be a doctor, not really because I really wanted to, but that's what I was thinking. And as I started in college, I realized I was very much interested in policy and affecting change on a policy level, on a systemic level. So then when it came time to declare my major, I declared something that I now call pre-public health. It was called biology and society. And that plus Africana studies was my minor. And it just really prepared me for public health. And I applied to graduate school for public health. But what was just one of these fortuitous things, I decided to take a year off before starting after I was accepted, and said, I felt that I really needed to be working in a rescue mission. I was aware of this rescue mission in New York, knew very little about it, passed by it one day, walking on a Saturday, walking up and down the streets, with friends. And it was stuck in my mind. And I just wrote them and said, I'd like to come work with you. And they said, we don't know who you are. Come in for an interview. So I did. And they hired me as a living counselor. So I lived with the homeless guys. I had a room, but it was on a floor with 68 guys that would come in one night at a time, because there would be a lottery. And then there were also another 25 homeless people their job was to take care of the building, do all of the work, cook, clean, do the laundry, and part of my job was to oversee those 25 guys. I just learned so much during those 2 years of living there with them. I was very fortunate the first week. Some guys who were there, I was much younger than most of them. They kind of took me under their wing and said, come spend a couple days with us. And so I went and saw what it was like going soup kitchen to soup kitchen, saw how they were treated, saw when they didn't have a place to sit down, how they had to lay down. I kind of did that with them. And so when the second year, I started public health school, graduate school, but I continued to live there. And then every time I had an opportunity, I would do an optional paper. I do it on healthcare for people experiencing homelessness, and started a group there with some medical students and faculty and public health students and faculty to volunteer at a large rescue men's shelter right across the street from the school. One other part, just how everything works together. When I was first started at the rescue mission, they had a team that would come, a medical team that would come a couple times a week, twice a week. And my job was to get the guys ready to see the doctor, like say, hey, I don't want you to leave today. I want you to stay here. The doctor's coming at 1 o'clock. I want them to look at that infection on your foot, and so forth. And that turned out to be the Healthcare for the Homeless program in New York City from the original 19. I did my internship for public health school at that program. They hired me afterwards. I was the 4th employee hired, and I told my boss I'll stay there for 2 years and then leave. I did leave, went to do something else, actually went to seminary for a couple of years, and but then came back and was there for over 20 years, the last 12 as executive director, until I came here to the council 6.5 years ago.
Okay, it's just incredible. The most I've done for a homeless person is share some money, and say a prayer for them. But you actually went all in. You started living with them right after you graduated university. Tell me, are you a man of faith?
I am. Did not grow up that way, but had a spiritual conversion when I was in college, for which I'm extremely, extremely grateful.
Oh, that explains a lot. You have to have this, so yeah, I follow Christ. I accepted Jesus Christ in my life at least 5 times, because I went into faith and then I would move out of the faith and went back in. And the last time I did that was last year. And now I'm not turning back. Now I'm really in to stay forever and ever and ever. Amen. But I see that my heart has always been towards the light, towards the love of Jesus. So when you have the love of the Lord in your life, there is nothing but compassion for the people that are in need. This is my personal experience, but you have it in a way that is 10 times more than a lot of people that I know, even in the community of Christ. So you were in university when you accepted the Lord. Like, how did that happen?
Oh boy. Short story. I'll make this short. Did not grow up, as I said, in going to church at all. Shortly after I started college, two things happened. One, I grew up in New York City, in Brooklyn. I went to school in upstate New York. It was very rural. My neighborhood was like 70% Puerto Rican. The rest were Jewish, and it was very diverse. College was not. So in short, I was going through culture shock. I didn't know it until later when I lived overseas. I was going through culture shock. That was one. Second, my father, who I did not grow up with, but I knew, spent some summers with him, and he passed away shortly after when I started college. And that got me starting to thinking about the big questions. What happens when you die? How should you live? Is there a God? If so, what is he, she, it like? So I started looking for answers, read the Quran during that time, some Buddhist literature, and started reading the Bible. And through a long series over a year and a half, just became convinced that was true, that I was a sinner. I realized I couldn't even keep my own standards, much less God's standards, and that by going to a small Black Baptist church in the town, and people just caring and sharing, I became convinced and accepted Christ when I was 19.
That is beautiful. Were you already in college then?
Yes, I was in college. It's in my second year.
It's crazy because what happened to you is the opposite of the normality, right? Kids grow up in church. If they grow up in a Christian church, they go to church, then they go to college and they lose their faith in college. And then later on, they have to get, run over by a bus to realize that they need God in their life, right? And then
Yes.
they go back to their faith,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah, I
How did that
feel
affect you?
so blessed.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
It's a blessing, right?
Mhm.
Because colleges, people say the stereotype that college is the time to experiment, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. Because if you actually get lost during college, it's very hard to go back to your faith, or the amount of suffering that they have to go through is dramatic. By the way, it's worth every bit of suffering you want if you go back to the light. You know,
Yes.
Bobby, how did that affect your decision to help the homeless?
Yeah, so I was always, even growing up in Brooklyn, I grew up in a poor neighborhood, but we were not poor. My mom was a teacher, so raising us, my two sisters and me on a teacher's salary, placed us at a higher level than most of my classmates in public school. So I was always aware that I had more than others, and that always bothered me. So I was always aware about that. And then when I was in college, very active in social activism, protests on campus and so forth. And so concerned about social justice, concerned about poor people who don't have. And when I left my neighborhood, I saw, I was pretty poor compared to others. But fortunately, it never got to the point of me saying, why don't I have as much as others? It always was, why do we have so much when some people don't even have the basic necessities? I saw classmates when I was growing up that were sick, weren't able to go to the doctor. Many of my classmates, when I was at the rescue mission, people I would play basketball out were coming in addicted to drugs, coming out of prison. And I realized, I just realized that little advantage that I had of my mom being a teacher kept me on a path that others fell into, from my neighborhood. So when I became a Christian, it didn't dampen my desire for social justice. It actually strengthened it, because now I could see this is not just how I think the world should be, but God saying we should love our neighbors and care for those, and we should sacrifice for those. So it actually added fuel and passion that enabled me to stay the distance, because it's not my own. It's from above.
Bobby, you're so right, and this is just confirming what I did today in my prayer meditation. I was meditating in the word what the Lord says. If the way to live this life is to love God with all your soul, all your heart, all your body, all your being, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Mm-hmm. And then somebody else asked God, asked Jesus, so who's my neighbor? And then he said the parable of the Samaritan. And if people are not aware, it's like all these religious people come and they see this guy that is broken. He had an accident and he's bleeding on the street. And all these religious people will come pass by them. And they were so busy trying to go to church that they never stopped to attend him. And then this guy, a Samaritan, he comes in, he shows up, and he realizes that this guy needs help. And he just attends to him and provides what this broken person needs. So he says that's your neighbor. So basically, your neighbor is anybody that needs help.
Yeah.
But you do it out of compassion, not out of guilt. And you can only feel that love and compassion if you are in the light, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I will say my organization is a secular organization. We have many people who are of faith, many people who are of different faiths, many people of no faiths, but we are joined around the common goal of we want to help our neighbors without homes, because we believe it is unacceptable in a nation as rich as ours, as powerful as ours, that we have people whose basic human needs are not being met. It really became clear to me when I was working at the rescue mission. I knew theoretically we all don't have an equal shot at life, But working at the rescue mission, it really became clear that, yeah. So we feel that's unacceptable, and people's basic needs should be met, and we can do that in this rich society.
And it's beautiful that everybody can get together regardless of what they believe and start helping, right? For me, one of the primary reasons for my compassion towards the homeless is because I realize now, after 51 years on this earth, that most of these homeless guys are addicted, and an addiction is just a result of deep pain, deep wounds. Most of those wounds are psychological, emotional, spiritual wounds. Because a normal, healthy body will never try to kill itself. You have biomechanisms in yourself that helps you keep alive, not die. And all these drugs and all these repetitive behaviors, all they're doing is killing you slowly. But what they are doing is numbing pain. So if somebody gets addicted to some substance, regardless of what it is, even addicted to food, some people are addicted to food, it's because they are using the substance to numb the pain. So they are just trying to deal with the symptom instead of going at the root cause. If you actually heal the person, if the person gets these emotional wounds healed, if their brain powers get corrected, they come out of addiction. And the minute they come out of addiction, they come out of homelessness. I've seen it repeated over and over again.
Yeah. So this is very fascinating because I've also seen the opposite. I've seen people who fall into homelessness for economic reasons. They got evicted because they couldn't pay their rent, and to numb the pain, fall into substances. So, looking at things from a public health point of view, I look at how can we heal society, and much of homelessness is a result of an interplay of public policies and individual weaknesses. And one of the biggest public effects that we have is a lack of affordable housing. So we have public policies that are really causing mass homelessness. We see lots of families where there isn't mental illness, where there isn't substance use, but just poverty, falling into homelessness. Mothers and fathers living with their kids in vehicles in some parts of the country. And speaking of the United States, this mass homelessness began in the very early 1980s. And it was that same time when Congress cut its outlay to make housing affordable by 77% between 1979 and 1982. And 1982. And then we see this huge rise in homelessness. So right now, this country, according to some estimates, subsidizes private home ownership, giving, you can deduct the interest on your mortgage. That's a cost to society or to the Treasury by not collecting that income of about $250 billion is one estimate, where we give about $50 billion to make housing affordable for poor people in this country. And because of that, only 1 out of 4 households that qualifies, that meets the very low standard, you can't make more than this in order to qualify for federal support, only 1 out of 4 gets it because of lack of funding. So these are choices that we make as a society. So looking at that from public policy, I look at it also from my lens of faith. What is the kind of society that God calls us to have? And I see that in many ways, it's not so much that the individuals alone have problems, but as a society, to have this kind of mass homelessness, it means that we aren't doing what we could, and we're not doing what we should.
Yeah, and Bobby, you're completely right. It always goes back to the emotional wounds, to the trauma that people experience. But in this case, you're completely right. The trauma is experienced by not being able to afford a home, right? And then they end up on the streets, and they end up into drugs trying to numb that pain. So it's crazy because this is another action. It's another issue, and you're shining the light on this. Thank you for that. I went to Singapore in 2019 And that I didn't see a single homeless person in Singapore, so I started researching. What they did there is incredible. It's incredible. Now, it works there because it's a small country, it's just a little island. But still, the way they have figured out homelessness is by providing affordable housing. And
Yes.
I love it because it's still a capitalist country, because the problem is a lot of people these days are going towards socialism and communism, and people are even saying, oh, our democracy needs a little bit of Marxism. They have no idea what they're talking about, and mostly it's the younger generations, because they haven't seen the Cubas of the world, the Venezuelas of the world, they haven't seen the North Koreas of the world. So communism is not the answer. The answer is reform in our capitalist system, where we can provide for people that are less privileged, a way for them to actually go through life in a beautiful way, in a better way. Right. And I think Singapore has figured it out. So I encourage you to go look at them, because when I saw the documentary, it's incredible how they actually figured it out.
Yeah, because I'm sure in Singapore they have people with mental illness, they have people with addictions. Every society does. But the question is, will they be housed or not? And they've made the housing affordable. So housing and supports is what we know can address homelessness. In fact, that very formula has cut veterans' homelessness by more than half in the last 8 years in the United States. They have special funding to subsidize housing for homeless veterans, and supports to help them stay in that housing, to help them deal with whatever issue it may be. So I just want to say, housing is a basic human need, and it is kind of a prerequisite among with a few other things for if anyone's going to be able to reach their full potential, they need that stability. And speaking from a health point of view, we see that people who are unhoused, especially unhoused on the street, unsheltered, they die on average about 20 to 30 years earlier than the general population. And that's true. That figure is true across societies, across countries. So we see how important housing is to maintain health and also to maintain a normal lifespan, which is essential for people to try to reach their potential.
It's crazy. But I think we have to keep working together towards a better future and helping our brothers and sisters that are in extreme need, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Breaks my heart. I come from a developing country. I come from Guatemala. I came to Canada when I was 19 years old. Back then, homelessness in Guatemala was horrible. I went back this year, and the problem is still there, but it's 10 times better than Canada and the USA. I'm like, what happened? What happened? And there is more rule of law now. Government doesn't have money down there to provide any type of services. But what happened is that as they provided better jobs and as the economy grew, people back there have this sense of family. So people stick together. So yes, they live in large neighborhoods with very poor housing, but it's proper housing still, with basic necessities. Mm-hmm. So you don't see people on the street sleeping on a sidewalk. You don't see that. I mean, you see it, but very few cases, and it's a city with 8 million people. Mm-hmm. But what you see is large communities where people have very humble housing, but they live together in families, and they help together. They take care of their own. And that's one of the things that I don't see in this society. North American society, you're on your own, right? Mm-hmm. And your kids live when they're 18 years old, and they usually don't come back. And we tend to forget that we need to take care of family. I mean, we're blood, right?
Yeah. And it's sort of an illusion, the American myth of the self-made man or self-made woman, because the fact is we have all had someone to help us along the way. We've gotten some benefits from society that we did not pay for. You didn't pave the road that you were able to drive from your home to work today, or unless you're working from home or whatever, you got the idea, to the store. That was a communal effort for which we all get the benefit. One physician who was the CEO of one of our member organizations in Portland said, and this stuck with me. She said, people talk about the survival of the fittest, But more and more, I realize it's the survival of the nurtured. So many of us have been nurtured. We've had good homes, we've had good home environments. Not that everything has been easy, but we've had some advantages that have helped us succeed. And we should remember that when we are thinking, as you said, we have to think that we are in a community. We are communal. We share things in common, including responsibility to care for each other.
You know, and you're completely right. I saw there was in Texas, they were running an experiment where they were building tiny houses for the homeless, and they lived in communities. Do you know anything about that? Because I saw that it was something that could actually be a paradigm shift.
Yes, there is a tiny home movement. I think it certainly has a place as part of the answer. One of the things it has that is really good is that it allows people to have a roof over their head in a room by themselves versus in a huge shelter sharing a room with 30, 40 other people. They can lock the door. So they have that space. It's very small, but it's theirs. And they usually are in like communities. They will usually have 10, 15, 20 or more in a given area. Many of them are self-governing, maybe a nonprofit running them, but the residents kind of make sure everybody is following the rules. So I may have been to the one that you went to. It's very large. I think it's called Father Joe's Village in Austin, famous all over the world. Nashville, where I am, has one, which is being used for medical respite. Far as I know, the first one in the country like that. So it's really, really, it's not for everyone. It has some of its limitations, but I think we need many solutions to solve this huge complex problem, and I think tiny homes is one of them. If I could talk a little bit more about medical respite, because this is one of my passions.
Yes.
And when we think about being innovative, one of the hallmarks of the council is that we, and the healthcare for the homeless movement, is that we believe we really need to listen to our patients, our customers, our consumers, our clients, whatever term you want to say. And in general, this is something healthcare does really, really poorly. Most businesses realize, well, we have to listen to our customers if we're going to be successful, to find out what they need. Human services doesn't do it that way. Human services generally starts with, we're the experts, what do we need to give them? And if they don't accept it, then they're the problem. We talk about service-resistant clients. If someone buys a Toyota instead of a Honda, Honda doesn't say, look at those people, they don't know what they're doing, they're Honda resistant. No, you didn't give them what they need. So one of the hallmarks of the council, we really try to incorporate is the voice of those that we are serving. So about 35 years ago, the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program and one in Washington, D.C. Independently, we're starting medical respite programs. For the one in Boston, it came from listening to the homeless patients. They said, "What do you need?" And they identified this problem. We're discharged from the hospital with nowhere to go. So that was the beginning of the first medical respite program, that became part of the council. The council has been supporting medical respite programs for the last 20 years in a formal way. And at the beginning of COVID, communities around the country for the first time were saying, how can we protect the health of our most vulnerable neighbors without homes, who are on the streets or in shelters? And the council, because of our expertise of listening to the medical providers and those that are being served, was in a position to say, hey, medical respite is part of the solution. And we just took a step of faith and got so many inquiries. We started the National Institute for Medical Respite Care. That was part of our strategic plan. We started it a year early because the need was there. And we just took a step of faith. And in the last 3 years, we've helped a number of medical respite programs start. We've helped a number improve their services. We, for the first time, became in a position where we were re-granting funds. We attracted at least $6 million that we've put back out to the field combined with technical assistance and startup. So it's great that we can offer technical assistance and startup. That's most of what we do in training. But now we're also able to give funding to a limited number of programs so they can implement what we're saying that they can do. So this was the country, many health departments realized that they needed medical respite. So it's been growing quickly, and the council is part of helping that to grow. And I know that it has saved lives and changed lives. And it's also been really important for the health system because it's avoiding unnecessary hospitalizations at great cost. So it's a win-win-win. And I'm just thrilled that the council is able to help advance medical respite around the country.
You know, Bobby, this is one of the things that is just brilliant from the public policy perspective. I mean, you're going to save money anyways in the hospital system by implementing something that is actually going to alleviate these people that are stuck in the void, right? What a beautiful, beautiful way to solve something that is critical. I mean, do you think somebody wants to ever go back to a hospital? They don't want to go back to the hospital, but they have to because there is no other way. Because they get sick again because there is nobody that finishes the treatment outside of the hospital system.
Yeah.
What a brilliant way. Yeah. What a brilliant way to solve a problem.
Yeah. And the thing is, we actually do know a lot of what it takes to solve homelessness. Like I said, we housing support and make housing to subsidize housing for poor veterans and services help to cut it by more than half. And that same formula can be used for all populations of people experiencing homelessness. Everybody is unique and has set problems, but in general, it's housing and services is the answer.
It's beautiful. Starting with housing.
Yes, yeah. We just need to invest the funds to do it. We know what to do. We have to scale the solutions at a need commensurate with at a scale commensurate with the need.
Bobby, and again, to testify that that's the solution, go back and look at Singapore, because that's what they realized. Everything started with expensive housing, right? Unaffordable housing. And this is a big problem in Canada right now. That's why we have so many homeless people too, because housing just became ridiculous, right, in the last 4 years. Bobby, I love to talk to you about fulfillment. A lot of my audience are people that are looking for fulfillment and breakthrough in their life. That's why it's called the Breakthrough podcast. What would you recommend to the audience on how do you live a life worth living, where you cannot wait for Monday to come in so you can go and add value again?
Yes, thank you. You mentioned the word calling, and I think that is really important. Not everyone will get a sense of calling of what they're supposed to do, but need to find out. The bottom line is most of us get the greatest fulfillment by helping others and being in connection. There are many people who earn lots of money and are not fulfilled. Obviously, we have a basic human needs we have to meet for us and our family. But what feeds the soul is knowing that you are helping someone else, that you're working in your strengths, in business, and I believe in life. I'm a big adherent to the adage, you build on your strengths and you build on your strengths and you compensate for your weaknesses. So there's a lot of tools, find out what you're good at, what you are uniquely designed for, what's good, where you bring the most value, what brings you satisfaction. And to the extent that you can, some people are able to make that their work, and that's wonderful. Other people make it their hobby. My church member in the Bronx was a fantastic musician, and he led the choir and all kinds of things. His day job was working as a conductor on the Long Island Railroad, but he's poured all of his extra time, and what got him extra fulfillment was using his musical talents in a way that he was helping the church, helping the community. So if you're able to make that your living, that's, earn your living money from it, that's great. If not, do it in your spare time, find a way to do it. So there really is no there are no barriers. You can find one way or another. If you can't do it in your work, you do it in your spare time to do what gives you joy, and it almost invariably will involve helping others, making a difference for others.
That's true. That is actually true. And it happened to me. I fell in the money trap, and then I fell in love with money. And the more money I made, the more holes I had in my heart. Until I realized it wasn't about that. It was about the calling. Once I switched that into helping unconditionally. It's funny because I started helping unconditionally, and the money kept going, and even more, but I didn't care about the money anymore. But now my heart was fulfilled. This is one of the reasons why I do this podcast. It just fills me up to figure out a way to help the audience, the world. This is completely free. Anybody can listen to this, and it's going to stay in the internet forever and ever until the internet is gone.
Yes. Yeah. I will add one thing which I really do enjoy about your podcast, and I urge other people. I work for a secular organization, but I do urge people to take care of their spiritual lives, to not forget that. And I understand there may be different faith traditions and different spiritual traditions, but it is important to take care of your spiritual lives. For you, for me, that's reading scripture, that's praying, but it's important to take care of your spiritual lives as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bobby. It's time to wake up. I don't know if people have seen what's going on around, but the island of Maui just got completely burnt out by a horrible fire. And, we started the year with 60,000 people dying in a horrible earthquake in Turkey and Syria. So things are not getting easier. And this is the time to wake up and say, okay, I am a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. Wake up and realize who you are. Figure out a way to know that when you die is not the end, it's just the beginning. So you better figure it out now that you're alive. Right. Bobby, thank you so much for being in the show. I truly enjoy our conversations. I will ask you one last question before we finish. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write on it?
Love thy neighbor. That's the part of the greatest commandment. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
If everybody were to do that, this world will be a completely different place, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Bobby, thank you so much for being in the show. If people like to find out more about the organization you're leading, how you're helping the homeless, how you're doing the bridge between hospitalization and people leaving the hospital, how can they find out about you?
Yes, our website is www.nhchc.org. Stands for National Health Care for the Homeless Council. nhchc.org.
Beautiful. Bobby, God bless. Thank you so much. And have a beautiful rest of the week.
Thank you. You too.
Cheers.
That's all for today's episode of the Break Free Podcast. Head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Starting your own business can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Visit davidmansilla.com to pick up a copy of the #1 international best-selling book, Breaking Out of Corporate Jail. Expand what you consider to be possible and reach your full potential. And join us on the next episode.